Thank you. Hello. Guten Morgen. How was that? I was practicing on the plane the whole way here. And at the airport, I think they wanted to put me in quarantine. Because you're not really speaking Dutch unless it sounds like you should be in quarantine. I've learned that over the 8 years coming to FITC to speak, and this is the first time in 8 years that I've spoken here and actually had an office here. Argo Design Europe is now located here in Amsterdam, down by Olympisch Park area. Just go and visit them. They don't know I'm sending you, but just tell them I sent you, and say hi to the studio if you like to. We've been in a strategic design partnership with Magic Leap for the last 2 years. I've been leading this program. It's given me visions into the future that we have today, as well as a lot of the past. Here I am on stage at LeapCon declaring that spatial computing has arrived. In the following 2 years, it's like I've been living in these novels that I've been reading and consuming ever since I was a young man, which proves that I didn't waste my life reading science fiction. It was actually good study. So spatial computing has arrived. Now what? How many of you heard of this Magic Leap thing? HoloLens thing? Nreal thing? How many of you have one of those systems? It's one. I got one too. I should raise my hands, right? So what do we do now? Well, we changed the way we work. We wear these things and collaborate in our office places and change the way we learn and change our educational patterns and change the way we use operating theaters and change what we do in our living rooms in the evening with dinosaurs. We also will water our digital plants. And don't be surprised if we also do a little bit of browsing of a volumetric Instagram. But right now, mostly what's happening is a whole lot of hello world. Right? It feels like things maybe were a little overhyped, but we've had this moment before. Back when computers were brand new, we didn't really know what we were going to do with them. 30 years ago, we made a lot of grand promises about the Apple IIe and the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64, promising that you would not use it more than 24 hours a day. And you would store all your recipes in the kitchen with it, and you wouldn't be able to cook anything without a computer. And people laughed at that for 20 years. And now we can't cook anything without a computer. Not only that, we don't really cook anymore. We just order stuff with our computer. What's going on here is that spatial computing is a platform problem. Just like computing was a platform problem. It's got a huge transition to make, and arguably, we're still at the dev kit level of these things. So the very famous iPhone dev kit that snuck out onto the internet about a couple of years ago. Really cool to see how that started out. As dev kits go, it's a very beautiful dev kit, as is HoloLens 2 and Nreal. They're very beautiful dev kits. In fact, they almost can be said to be somewhat consumer ready, at least for early adopters. Certainly developers, we haven't had a dev kit this good in a long, long time. The Xbox dev kit was kind of atrocious in the beginning, right? But it's not quite consumer ready because it's also a bit of a form problem that we have. And we had this form problem in computing too. It took a long time before we found the form that was a handheld mobile computer that people would take everywhere all the time. We know what the form of mixed reality, what we could call wearable mobile computing rather than handheld mobile computing is. It's this right here. If we can get down to this, people will wear them everywhere all the time. And I mean, that's what everyone's plan is. And there's really nothing in the laws of physics to prevent that from happening. It's just going to be a bit of a long, hard slog. I think it'll take half as long as it took us to make the transition from this to this, or maybe a quarter as long, actually, because it's progressing really rapidly. All right, so what exactly is Magic Leap, then, if it's not like the thing that a million people are going to run out and buy tomorrow that changes computing forever? Well, what it is a full-stack mixed reality platform, as is Nreal, as is Microsoft. Nreal's not quite on the market yet, and it may be held up, unfortunately. So there's really 2 of these that you can start playing with now. There's another 3 and 4 and 5 anticipated. Facebook's going to come out with one. Everyone knows Apple is going to come out with one. And it's very likely that Samsung, LG, and a few other will make some form of this, but I'm not sure they'll be full stack mixed reality platforms any more than their full stack handheld mobile computer. They're heavily reliant on an OS layer from somewhere else, and they don't have a lot of a software stack behind it. Magic Leap does make their own wearable spatial computer. They released it. This is a pretty incredible feat. It's where the famous billions of dollars went to. And they had to raise that money, which is really an interesting task. And it consists, the hardware side of it consists of a few pieces here. It's the lightware, which is display optics. It's a bunch of forward-facing sensors, depth sensor and camera sensors. User sensors, a bunch of sensors that poke back to the user, mainly for eye tracking. A control field that pairs with the control we'll talk about later, and a sound field. It's got 3D audio. It's a really sophisticated wearables display. And then they have what they call the light pack. This is CPU, GPU, battery, and radios. It's commonly what we call a computer. And they're hooked together with a cable at this point. And then they have a control. It's buttons, touchpad, accelerometer, and a 6-DoF field. And so it can do 6-DoF with no trackers needed in the room. They have their own operating system, which is called LumenOS. And it's for the user to launch different softwares, be it immersive standalone pieces of software written in Unity or Unreal, or stuff that runs in their own, what you could call desktop, which they would call landscape, which is a series of prisms that can run applications. And the operating system also has a very deep stack for doing the kind of photogrammetry for SLAM to keep the world in sync with you, to scan and build up world maps so that you can do mixed reality tricks, and also to do gesture and voice tracking. So it has a multimodal input stack built into it, as all of the platforms will have to have. In terms of software, Magic Leap has a lot of Cloud API, SDK, Passable World, Magicverse. Both deal with mapping, permanence, understanding the world around us. Livestream deals with identity and data. And then C3, which is a collaboration platform for cooperative computing. And then you have the Lumen SDK, Prismatic, MagicScript, and then the Unity and Unreal support. That's all different languages for writing software and deploying it on the device. And then they have their own core applications they write for the device. And they have a few services, mostly enterprise services right now, but also entertainment services. So that's a full stack platform right there, similar to what Microsoft will have. I think Microsoft, though, also has this thing called Azure. They have a few 30,000 developers behind them. They're pretty mature on the platform side. So that gives you a spatial computer. What's a spatial computer? Well, it's a computer that scans your environment to understand what's going on in terms of objects, surfaces in the room. This way the applications that you run can integrate. It's also just a big display, a heads-up display as well for augmented reality. So once you digitize the world, your room can become this new multifunction computer. And what do you do with that? Well, there's certain values that will come from that, moving computing into real space. And they're pretty basic ones. I'm not going to do the hyped up ones of use case scenarios. I'm just going to give you some principles here to think about. One is marking up the physical world. Okay? This, by the way, is done with projection. And I'll state later, I think projection will have a role in mixed reality and spatial computing in terms of headsets as well. This is for ugly people at the bar. Because if you're ugly, you sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait, and while all the pretty people get served, and then eventually you get a drink. This one, it's like Uberization. You just put it down, and then they'll just fill it up. You can take it later. You can put interfaces anywhere, calmly, without expensive retrograde. You could integrate those interfaces into your space, so they coordinate along with real-world objects. You could allow objects themselves to participate, not just as an information stream or as an anchor, but even as a control interface if you wanted to attach such kind of metadata. This allows you to be heads-up present while computing rather than the immersive tunnel that is our smartphones, or the personal pattern of computing, we could call it. And it's not soon after you move your interface into the environment that you would like others to join you in it. You get this sense of, I now have a personal computer and I now have a shared computer, and that me and someone else can cooperate in the same interface at the same time, which removes a lot of friction. In fact, if you look down this whole list, what we've done is just removed about 3 clicks from everything, okay? A lot of friction removed from computing. Every time we've done that in the past, it's been an enormously successful change to computing, right? So here, these people got to make these decisions together. They didn't have to catch up with context on each other's devices. They just used the same interface. A lot of context garnered for free. And of course, be playful. Augmented reality and mixed reality makes for just kind of an amazing sort of immersive environment. Not to be confused with immersive virtual reality, but it does its own kind of magic. What did someone describe these to me as after I had them try on? They said they were describing it to the next person to try them, and they said, oh, these are goggles that make you see trippy shit. So there you have it. An undersold notion about mixed reality and spatial computing in general is a return of multitasking. Okay, we did a lot of multitasking on these guys. If you're a professional office worker, you still do. But in order to get to handheld mobile personal computing, we sacrificed a level of multitasking and went into a one-at-a-time app model with multitasking kind of passed on. When you take this, and that was because this is too big to carry around. We only want to use it 8 hours a day at office, but we'd rather use this. Take this everywhere with us, right? It was a good sacrifice. But when you take this and put it here, the screen gets big again. And when it's volumetric, it does interesting things where things can be far away and close and use the same number of pixels. And that way it has a huge advantage over projection. Because projection has a fixed field of focus. You make stuff small, it uses less pixels. Here you make things small, it uses more pixels. You make things big, it uses the same number of pixels. Right? This means you can spread things out and begin multitasking again. I love this. You get to the very young ones, even after millennials, and you tell them, imagine you could use WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook all at the same time. They go, wow. So you could do that, return to multitasking. It's a very human computer. When you wear it, it has human senses. Well, maybe not this one, but when we get to this version, it's one that's going to fit into our lives very well. Okay, so this new multifunction computer, how in the heck are we actually going to use it, right? You're not going to walk around with a mouse on tables. Well, you might sometimes. Use a human input model, okay? So as humans, we naturally divide the world into placeable objects, things that will move, and surfaces to hang or place them on, right? So we interact with spatial computing the same way with the world. You look, you grab, and you place, okay? And that can be done very directly with direct manipulation. Anyone who's played with the HoloLens 2, it has a lot of direct manipulation. Okay, unfortunately, humans are lazy, right? The TV proved this. There was a time when you had to get up and change the channel, and this was a major barrier of entry to televisions. The remote control actually took televisions from 10% of households to nearly 100% of households, along with a cost curve, right? It's the same thing, right? I don't always want to walk over to the interface to use it, so you're gonna have tools. The control is an example of a tool, right? And with that tool, you can still look, grab, and place because we're very good tool users. We just point a control ray at it, we pull a trigger, we lift something up, we press it, we manipulate things with a touchpad. And by the way, that can be moved to gesture very easy too. If I can cast a control ray with a gesture, I don't necessarily need the control, I can just start computing. Doesn't it look like I'm computing? Right, I'll just go. Right? That's why I think that gesture is going to succeed over this one, because it looks like I'm not computing, it looks like I'm pissed at this guy. I was just computing. It's cool. Good sport, thank you. How do we act with computers? Actually, look, swipe, select is how we interact with computers. We do a lot of swiping either with the mouse or with the thing. It's something to do with the 2D plane. But as human beings, we've always presented information in a 2D plane because we're not dolphins and we don't see in 3D. We don't have sonar. Our libraries don't look like a cube. They're actually long shelves. They're 2.5D. And so anytime you do a lot of information presentation in spatial computing, you probably still will do fair amount of look and swipe and select. So you're still going to have those interfaces. But there's going to be entirely new interfaces because once you go into spatial computing, 3D is a big, big, big deal, right? And so there's going to be whole new interfaces that are being invented now. Twitter is where to keep up with Magic Leap and HoloLens. These developers are still loving Twitter. If you go search like Magic Leap experiments or Magic Leap Hello World or Magic Leap videos on Twitter, you're going to find a bunch of developers posting their work. And it's really interesting to see what they're doing with transmodal interactions, right? They have combinations of voice, gesture, gaze, eye control together, right? So now they can, something that I brought to this stage a couple years ago, you can say, turn on that light, right? Or say, put that there, right? Or do combinations of trigger pulls while looking at things or different kind of gesture interfaces. That transmodal stack is going to be very important to spatial computing. It's how it's going to operate. All right, let's talk a little bit about software. Here it's going to start to get a little weirder. Some lovely chai. What is this magic verse that Roni talked about? If you saw LeapCon, at the end of it, he said we were all going to meet in the desert and invent the magic verse. We didn't. We did it down in Plantation, Florida, where Magic Leap is. It's a bit of a food desert, though, so there's that. It's still named Plantation, but it's where it's all happening. So Magic Verse is a software layer that deals with, let's call it, placefulness, okay? Spatial computing is now out there. When you have a computer vision system looking at a place, specific location starts having meaning. Things like entering a door, crossing a threshold start taking on meaning from our everyday lives, right? It meant that I had logged in when I entered the space. Right? So software could just run, right? The fact that there's a sign over there, wayfinding is an obvious use of it, right? Or conference scheduling, but having specific location down at a 9mm level imbues things with a certain context and meaning, which changes computing. Okay, I'll try and give a better example of that, okay? I found this on the internet. It's a web page that allows you to pick a background and then pretend that you're writing graffiti. All right? If we scrub the chrome off of this, just transparent chrome, and we scrubbed the background and made it transparent, and we hung it in space against this wall. Anybody know where this fish is? Yeah, it's over there off of Damrock over here. This little fish. Well, then that whole application suddenly took on a new capability. It had a lot more sense. It improved the experience altogether. And it's not just improving experiences. So let's say I wrote another web page. All this web page is taking a URL. It's a complex URL, and at the end of it is a room number. There's a token for authentication because it's hitting the back-end server of my Marriott Bonvoy system, let's say, right? And it returns to me the current status of a room, whether it needs cleaning or whether it's still occupied or whether it's clean and available, right? And that's what this website does. I have to have a certain amount of information, and here's room 530, and here's room 532, and if this was in a handheld, I could type in a room and get that back. Kind of 2 clicks per room. Back, type in the numbers, enter, right? Well, if I took those same web pages and just hung them permanently next to a door, right, suddenly it has a lot more meaning, and I removed 3 clicks from every interaction, right? So specific location combined with computing actually builds a new metaphor for computing, right? So I can literally now tell you the presentation is on my desk, right? This creates 3 cool possibilities. One, like you guys don't even know where my desk is, but you instantly imagined my desk when I said the presentation is on my desk, because this is how the human mind works, right? We got off the Serengeti plane. We were the 200-pound apes that beat the 600-pound apes because we could divide the world into fictional spaces, and there was a fictional lion on one side of the oasis, and so we always went and drank from the other side. whereas our 600-pound cousins used instinct and extrasensory perception and strength to always live in the truth of the moment, and it was kind of a random thing whether they smelled the lion or not, right? So we've continued this our entire existence, dividing the world up into these fictional spaces until they became physical spaces, rooms and everything. It's just the way our brains work. So when I said the presentation on my desk, you actually imagined it. If you'd ever seen my desk, you probably could see my desk, right? And if you ever went to my desk and you were wearing one of these systems, well, there's the convenience that you could dig through a task stack and there's a presentation. That has all kinds of usefulness too, especially if we can all be in the same interface looking at the same presentation at the same time. But get rid of all of that and just make it an interface and realize that Jared, office desk, is 3 steps away from the presentation. Whereas Jared, after we got through the sharing, so you started at my drive, Jared, the Magic Leap, Magic Verse, presentations, FITC, you eventually got to the presentation. 7 steps versus 3 steps, right? So we've been dealing with this computer metaphor of desktop folder that's really was an approximation of the 60s workspace just to get people conversant in computing, because they didn't understand directory, they didn't understand grep, they didn't understand memory pointers. So they're giving a file folder desktop metaphor and they understood it. It was simple enough to expand computing to like 1/3 of the world at that point. There are now literally people putting files in folders who've never put a file in a folder. They've never owned a filing cabinet. It's time for this metaphor to pass on or perhaps remain with personal computing. Now we could use metaphors like room and landscape, but it's not going to sound like a metaphor anymore because it doesn't sound really naturally. We're just going to say, hey, yeah, fire up that feed. It's at the O2, right? And you just find the O2 and go, right? Very interesting opportunity here to completely change the metaphor of computing. Where do we start? Well, a lot of it's going to be dark data, and it's going to be like, hey, what if I put that stuff there? It's a lot more convenient. This is low-hanging fruit, especially in enterprise and industrial areas where people will actually wear the devices because they're paid to wear them until they get small enough that we will all wear them. Removing the screen. So there's a lot of workplaces or workflows where someone's doing this, and anytime someone's doing this, it's a place where this is a very applicable technology now. Removing screens. There's a lot of places where people have 3, 4, or more screens, either for reasons of entertainment or productivity. It's actually a place where it works. Communications. Right now we are set up for telepresence. Telepresence can only be a form of a meeting. A meeting is only a form of review. What we need is forms of collaboration. Some of the first movers in these space. Experiential, obvious one. Hopefully some of you will be involved in this soon. It's a really cool technology for experiential. Here's something that Red Paper Heart, Lisa Walter speaking later in this conference, did at CES for Harley Davidson. There's a lot of this stuff starting now. It's mature enough now, and a lot of features have been added in the last year that if you're an experiential or a marketing agency, it's time to look into the device. You can probably do something fun and cool with it. You probably need a Unity developer, but they'll get it done. Collaboration. There are a lot of collaboration startups in the space kicking off. There is a core application called Social. There's spaces that are doing certain kind of cooperative computing, and then they're releasing Jump here soon for enterprises, which is a volumetric telepresence app which allows for collaborative computing in a shared space. So here, these guys are playing chess. They just as easily could be marking up a model, but one of them is being volumetrically represented, and one is in the room. I've done this. It's pretty cool. It's kind of creepy. The quality will need to get better. Probably deep fake will take over or something like that, or like little cool avatars, right, just to get the bandwidth down. But man, yeah, it's better. You can actually collaborate in an environment like this, whereas anytime you're in telepresence, you immediately go into that review. Digitizing, actually, if you're doing any kind of mapping, the Magic Leap 1 is a really great mapping tool. It's like your own mobile LiDAR unit, right? So consider that, and more people will be making more use of that. Mapping itself, a lot of people in GIS and stuff are finding use in it. Training scenarios, because you can place information in context, it has a lot of training applications, as VR has. And of course, gaming. So a lot of fun games that Magic Leap themselves put out that a lot of the studios like Epic and others are working on and will continually. You know, I want Oregon Trail across here, I love Splatoon, where the multiplayer, where we really are painting up the room. Like we could play Splatoon in all of Central, right? What a great afternoon that would be with about 20 of your friends. But why? Why are we going to do this? Well, because we live a digital lifestyle. Okay, this is why we want to do spatial computing. We live a digital lifestyle. We have these smartphones. We take them everywhere. They complete us. We have chosen them over our own safety. There is a problem with them where they suck your attention into a hole. This is counter-evolutionary, perhaps. I would say this is a value statement. It's how much we love computing. We want it to join us in the real world. Okay, what we want is an integrated reality. And what spatial computing offers is an integrated reality, one where our digital lifestyle can join us in the real world, both to spread out amongst us, but also so our friends can join it. And this establishes the next pattern of computing, as we talked about earlier. This is the third wave, perhaps, right? We've had these sea changes, and each time we had is increased the number of people using computing and the amount of time we spend on computers. We're at the point now where we carry this around with us all the time, and we're on it about 50% of our life. And about 50% of the population is there, some of it not there for reasons of poverty, some of them because the metaphor is not quite right yet. This metaphor of spatial computing, heads up, always present, cooperative, promises to bring computing to the other half of our life. And this is the moment where I tend to sense a little tension. Anytime I get to this point, people are thinking, do we really need more computing or even technology in our life together? Are we losing touch with humanity? Yeah, tune in with yourself. There's a bit of an anxiety there. I feel it. Product designers and designers in general have always felt it. We've always wondered, what are we foisting onto the market? Are we behaving responsible? Is it meaningful? Now consumers are sharing this anxiety. They don't quite know why, but stuff like this is probably afflicting them, right? They're worried. Will we become the pets of the robots? Right? And I understand that. Stories like this are stories just from the last few months, right? Of robotics and AI entering areas of our life in really scary ways. And we're like, And then these are the guys who are making the robots. And I'm not saying he's being mean, but he's just being human, right? I, for one, am not afraid of the robots because of bananas. See? And also because I know that if they become like humans, they will also just walk into a fountain while checking their text messages. A lot of defenses, but still I'm paranoid enough that every day I wake up and I tell my Alexa to let the robots know that I'm on their side. There weren't a lot of engineers in the room, but if you know anything about the way machine learning works, if I do this 10,000 times, it just gets written into the code. So when that human-robot war happens, there'll be like a ring around my house of robots going like, why can't, but yeah, he's on our side, right? Also remember, only you can prevent Skynet. But you're still nervous because then really smart people like this come out and say with artificial intelligence, we're summoning the demon. Elon Musk generally regarded as intelligent, or Stephen Hawking. AI is likely to either be the best or the worst thing to happen to humanity. So rest in peace. He was a very smart man. He's not wrong this time. Kind of hedged there. We've been writing about this a long time. Here's a very old script writing about how technology will create a trap for humanity, and as we progress towards the singularity, this moment when computing intelligence is equal to that of human intelligence, like this fear, this anxiety takes hold. What is this about? Well, let's just practice the basics of therapy. One, let's name our anxiety. Our anxiety is called something that we will call peak technology, okay? Peak technology is the year where the majority of new technology released does nothing whatsoever to advance humanity. For the last 200 years, there's been a very solid track record of technology improving humanity. We'll discuss why in a little bit. But now we're entering a phase where we wonder. We're beginning to wonder, right? I get this, we're futurists. I put out this stuff all the time, right? The future is wonderful because of technology. Autonomous vehicles will be scheduled to automatically pick you up in the lobby as you leave work. As you're riding home, it'll give you all the information you need to make your next home purchase, play a game, entertain yourself. Then you'll kick back and watch the Game of Thrones as your automated robot takes you safely to your house. So safe that death in automobiles will be nearly eliminated. But should you get into a crash, an autonomous drone will literally drop from the sky and pick you up and take you to the hospital. And it's like, wow, the future is going to be great. I have nothing to worry about. And then the smart hairbrush comes out that scans your hair follicles for hair. Or you find out there's a walking skateboard. We did this one. It's a pen for taking notes. A random fast company. This is a little app you can have scan your text messages to let you know if the person texting you is in love with you or not. Which I would argue, if you don't have the emotional IQ to figure that out, you shouldn't be in a relationship. Here's a little emulation of humanity. Yeah. It's a robot that finds Waldo, and this is a car for a pet fish. Just so they won't be lonely, here's a car for a plant. So like, at this point, you went from, wow, the future is great, to wait a second, where'd all this crap come from? You see, it used to be really expensive to put products on the market. Manufacturing expensive, give product designers like me a job because we had to go out and figure out what people would value, design it into the product before it came out. It's now very cheap to manufacture things. This means that China does a combinatorial thing where they find two successful products put together and list it on Instagram. There's a push into the market now, right? And that makes you wonder. That makes it real easy for stuff to show up and exist that literally has no value. There are now circular technologies. Part of Facebook exists so that you interact with Facebook. It gathers your data to get you to interact with it again, and you interact with Facebook to get the feeling of interact with Facebook. All you're doing is interacting with Facebook. There's technology now that exists solely for you to serve yourself, okay? And then the manufacturing has gone modular. It's gone into the home. Craft and art used to be a domain of inexpensive supplies with talent. Computation is now a craft and an art. That guy made that skateboard himself, right? When you make something for yourself, sometimes it has value for humanity and sometimes it doesn't, right? So a lot of those products, you're wondering, are they doing anything to advance humanity? Are they simply moving us closer to peak technology? I would argue all of them do, except for this one. That one's very important. And it's not just this, like somewhere on the Star Trek Enterprise, there's a Sky Mall catalog. These aren't just novelty products, right? It's imbued in humanity that you give us technology, and we're not always going to put it to very high uses. Sometimes it'll be just used for silly things like augmented reality porta potties. This is one of my favorites. Wait for it. That one's available. They're standing. I took these to Burning Man. That's how easy it is to do this stuff, right? And what they do is it shows you it's empty. Now someone is standing. Now I'm in this porta potty. I'm going to sit down. Now I'm sitting. And now I'm standing again. It's a very useful feature. Now I'm done. I say, if you give me a little of your privacy, I'll give you a feature. Everyone needs features. No one needs privacy. Then this is the Zen gardener. Anybody who's seen my Zen gardener before? A couple people. You know what it does? It autonomously rakes a Zen garden. That's all it does. Which begs the question, should it exist? Because the entire point of a Zen garden is to rake the garden yourself. It is a meditative act. Right? And this is the one, I've taken this to a lot of places, a lot of maker fairs, the Bay Area, right? And this one triggers that anxiety, that peak technology anxiety in people more than anything else, and it gave me an epiphany of maybe why, something we're dealing with. Augmentation versus emulation. The more technologies begin to emulate humanity, the more we get into this anxiety cycle. Because then we begin worrying they will be evil, right? We begin worrying, we give this a name, the trolley problem, right? We want these things to be moral, ethical, to protect us, right? Will the car kill grandma or the kid or the driver? That's the trolley problem, right? It's an autonomous vehicle. It's supposed to be smart enough, but it has to make this decision, right? I've heard this story before. It sometimes goes like this. We need to pull in the crop. It's fall. We're harvesting the wheat. Oh my goodness, what is that kid doing there? We're going to kill him. First of all, why is the kid there? Why is the rock there? Right? Just like why is the grandma, and why is there a vehicle that's smart enough to drive itself but not smart enough to get out of this problem? Right? Here's what usually happens. Superman comes in and saves the day, right? Because technology is moral and good, and even though it's powerful, it always exists to save us. We did a play on this called the Hero Drone. This is a computer vision system and a ballistic drone, right? So that if you're checking, this is our solution to the trolley problem, right? So the car can just protect the driver. The system is watching the pedestrian who's on Instagram is about to get killed, and then it deploys ballistically, inflates an airbag, and knocks him out of the way. So if you have bad technology, requires good technology, and there will forever be a war like Marvel, good versus evil. Except for this problem, what Batman knows about Superman, that he is not human, and that it's very good that he's good, because if he becomes aware that he is a god, then you better hope he's good, right? This is a bit of a fallacy, though. There's actually other things we need to think about in terms of technology before we even approach that. How about this? Innovation versus escapism. Innovation is helping humanity. Escapism is, it's hard to deal with immigration, let's invent a robot to pick crops. There's a lot of technology being foisted on us simply to escape humanity. Deploy versus raise, right? We've had a long history of deploying technology, right? But this new technology, should we just deploy AI? If it's human and it's making human decisions, right? It takes a long history of apprenticeship, study, maturity, political gain to get into control of an electrical grid. But we'll take a 2-year-old AI and just put it in charge of it tomorrow. Maybe we need to raise our AI as well in terms of a deployment strategy, rather than use the deployment strategy of technology, which is if a hammer allows people to put in a nail, give everyone a hammer. Serve versus use. Does technology serve us, or does it use us in service of itself? We talked about that one earlier with Facebook. Push or pull. We talked about that earlier with Amazon. I would say the singularity is a place where we worry if technology is good. Let's create the other singularity, one where we make technology human, and I'll give a few examples and then we'll be done. I'm going to take the Zen gardener to Burning Man someday. I just need to raise a little money. If you want to donate, just see me later. But I'm going to make it Asimov compliant. This is what the Zen gardener looks like when it's Asimov compliant. First of all, it immediately stops raking the garden because it realizes by the first law it must do no harm, and it's removing the opportunity for a human to be mindful and present, therefore it must stop raking. However, if you were to exceed a sufficiently strong command, letting the robot know that you were mindful of presence, perhaps by meditation, then it would be allowed to rake the garden. But you couldn't tell it what to rake, because then you're removing the opportunity for the robot to be mindful and present. So it gets to choose the pattern. And so we're going to build this up with little headsets and stuff and put it out there. I've done some testing. The robot does work on the playa. So it's just a matter of getting the rest of it together. Make computers more human. We talked about this earlier about special computing. Computers right now suck us into an environment away from humanity. We can make them very human, like Neil Harbinson, who has an implant that lets him see colors. He's colorblind. Some people are doing this of their own accord, or we could just make hardware that takes on a very human form factor and a very human form. Or this is where I think projectors come in. Maybe we surround ourselves with projectors so that we can create a calm interface whenever we're wanting it, one that everyone is always privy to. Therefore, it has a kind of a social etiquette flow and humanity to it. Let's take autonomy And instead of creating the trolley problem, let's use it to create an abundance, right? We did this thought experiment when Amazon bought Whole Foods, of what if their culture and logistics truly mixed, right? We could attach this problem with perishable goods that happens in Western cultures where almost 75% of it is thrown away before it gets to the market. So we grow 4 times the food we need in order to get a quarter of it into people's refrigerators. Well, what if you put a second door on the refrigerator and put it through the wall, right? And there were 2 sides. This is Amazon's side, where they deliver groceries based on artificial intelligence, determining your preferences. And if you wanted to buy something, you pull it off of this shelf and put it on that shelf, and you've purchased it. Now everyone's houses become a giant warehouse, and if the person next to you needs Brussels sprouts, they can just go over there. If these were grown hydroponically in the garages of the neighborhood, we could cut like 6 weeks off of the field to table market, which is 6 weeks of freshness in order to get all this food eaten, right? And of course, humans would pick it very purposely because there are people who love gardening and would do this work, right? And it's a funny thing, right? The UPS man, the delivery man, right, is kind of a revered person because they visit you in your home, you see them, you know they're human. Whereas the person who picks your crops is dehumanized and you don't mind them being replaced by a robot. So let's humanize those things, right? Let's go ahead and tax the robots and pay humans to be farmers. At this point, jobs can become work, okay? I'll use Burning Man to explain the difference. First of all, how do you know someone has been to Burning Man? They will tell you. Burning Man is a dress rehearsal for a post-scarcity society. Catherine Meyernock put that description on it. I think she's very right. Some of the things you don't see at Burning Man is all the work that happens, because by Wednesday you're so bored and you realize that it's work that builds the human soul. So you go and find work, and that's the difference between work and a job. A job drains your soul, work builds your soul. Right? These are different jobs, different lines of work that I've done at Burning Man. I've been a barista serving coffee. I've slung ice for Antarctica. I deliver the mail. It's really fun to deliver the mail. And I fixed bikes. And of course, I worked very hard setting up art out there, right? Nobody's getting paid. It's a gifting economy. A lot of work happens in a city of 75,000 people. You can get rid of all capitalism, transition into a post-capitalist. People will still want to work. We could probably employ them doing things that they want to do. That's the trailing soul, by the way. It's 100 yards long, and it physically manifests the light, energy, and intellect of a person for 100 yards, which means people cannot ignore you. They are triggered into immediacy, and you have to think carefully about what route you take. It was really fun to drag it around the playa. It takes about 8 minutes to go by someone. Also, people navigate out there via artworks, like as landmarks, but this one moves. Some people really thought that was cool. That's the apparition on the front. Yeah. If you want to know a wider version of this than just Burning Man, read Walkway by Cory Doctorow. He talks a lot about what an abundant society could look like in a lot more of a real picture. Here's some of some of that work that could happen in the future: an ethical coder, a curator, an eco-poet, a human driver. Can you imagine a Craigslist ad that said "human driver wanted for wedding"? Or like a livery stable. I can, because we do it with horses and carriages now. Ethical coder, orchestrating advisors to watch artificial intelligence. This is a product we worked on for a company called Cognitive Scale, who has a cloud platform for deploying artificial machine learning intelligence skills. There's this companion profile where you could actually deploy advisors to watch the skills to see if they were acting in an ethical mean. For instance, if one needed to do a random selection, then you could write an advisor that just looked at the results and said, was it in fact random, and throw a flag if it wasn't. I think of also like Cory Doctorow's Rapture of the Nerds. You could serve on a product jury. Right? In Rapture of the Nerds, there's so much technology that it can't just get on the market without passing a jury of 12 peers. The main protagonist is headed their way to product jury. I like this idea. Maybe in the future, there's going to be such an abundance, we're going to need a product jury to decide if things could advance humanity. Eco-poets is a concept that was introduced to me by Kim Stanley Robinson. Basically, it's terraforming. right? Terraforming plus Shinto religion, right? So you could take someone, you could place this ad on Craigslist that says $65,000 a year to live in the Lincoln National Forest and to garden it actively like we do the Muir Woods and make it this beautiful. There's 50 million hectares in the Lincoln National Forest in the US. So if you gave everyone a mile to manage, you could give jobs to a few 100,000 people. A few 100,000 people that are suffering in cities today because their soul would be most healed by work in nature and ecology and ensuring that Mother Earth had the kind of a diversity and abundance that could continue humanity to take on its true mantle of the Solarian race. That's something for the bar later. We're not really Earthlings when you think about it. Because the Earth orbits the sun. Like, more accurately, we're Solarians. We just don't realize it yet. We could create that's later tonight at the bar. I'm almost done. I know this is my last 2 slides. And we could create the carbon cycle. This is carbon engineering out of Canada. Like, we're so scared of like terraforming, but they actually have a pretty good low energy input that sequesters carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere, combines it with other hydrocarbons to make oil. And oil exists because it's easy to make chemically, right? We could make a circular carbon economy if we wanted to. So let's raise technology to be human and we'll have nothing to worry about. That'll help solve this anxiety with some of those principles we can talk about. And then lastly, don't live in the future. Advice from a futurist, right? Job security for me, I'll think about it. You guys, no. It's more like this. You know, I would like to pay homage to a great man who passed away just a couple months ago, and that's Sid Mead, who did this painting, which happens to be what every children's museum looks like 40 years before it existed. And I had a good conversation with him once and asked him how he figured out what the future was going to be. Figure out what the future was like. What he did was he took today and he extrapolated it, and then he painted a painting of that extrapolation, which is why this quote is so accurate, right? So if you want to have a good future, don't think about a good future. Have a good today, and it will extrapolate into a good future. So thank you. The future can be post-scarcity, logistics by autocracy, ecology by eco-poets, abundance by automation, frictionless revolution, curated capitalism, and spiritualism by philologics. These are all things we can talk about at the bar later, and we can avoid peak technology. Thank you, and have a good festival.